Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Bubbling Adventure, a podcast all about kids and how educating them positively can impact their entire life as well as society. Each week, we are having conversations with guests on different themes, and our aim is to have open discussions, share different points of view, and learn in a non judgmental way. Today, we are welcoming Heidi, who will share her view on what to tell your kids about 2020. And I really loved her ideas and how she communicates with her kids. But without further ado, let's begin.
Maman, maman, en faisant cette chanson.
Papa, papa, en faisant cette chanson.
Maman, papa, maman, papa.
Hello, Heidi. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you, Julie. How are you?
Good, thanks. Thank you so much for joining. I'm very excited about this episode.
I'm excited too. I love talking about my daughter and how I parent her.
That's perfect then. Okay, so would you mind just introducing yourself to the audience?
Yep, sure. So I'm Heidi. I have an 11-year-old daughter, soon to be, well, she's going to be 12 in January. Just finished her junior school journey, about to embark on being in senior school, which feels very strange to me. I work full time within the tech industry. Love balancing being a full-time working mum as well as all the other commitments and fun things I like to do. I'm also a stepmom to a 19-year-old and an 8-year-old. They're both boys, so that's a very different dynamic to having a daughter and understanding what it takes to bring up boys and parent boys. You have to change things in a very different way when dealing with boys. So yeah, we have a really nice blended family. I also have an elder stepdaughter who is 21, so again it's learning how do you deal with an elder child and a younger child. So yeah, it's a really nice challenge to have, actually learning about sort of parenting your actual child and then any stepchildren that you have, and the dynamic as well.
Yeah, that must be very interesting, and you must be very busy between your work and also taking care of the kids.
Yeah, 100%. And I feel like I see my parenting goes beyond my four walls. It's not just about what do I do at home to help my children. It's about what do I do, how involved do I become within their schools, within the clubs that they want to do, activating their interests. So to make them, the main thing for me is it's about education of children, but it's not just about being book smart. It's about being worldly, and having an awareness of where you fit in that world. It's not just about the academics, it's about having those well-rounded individuals. So for me, I always expand my parenting outside my four walls, which makes me even busier, but for me, I will hopefully end up with very well-rounded children out of it.
Right, that's very impressive. And so how do you get involved? Like, what do you do, to do a little bit more?
So for when I think about things that I do for my daughter, whatever school she goes to, actually she changed schools in September last year to do her final year of junior school at a new school. So but in the two schools that she has attended, because she started school in a preparatory school from when she was just over 2, so I always become a part of the parent committee. So I always become part of the parent council, so I really understand the workings of the school, what's going on, because for me it really helps you to understand what could be coming up, the environment your child is in. I also become a part of any of the charities that help raise money for the school. So I get really heavily involved in the school community. One of the things that my parents always taught me is that when a school sees that you are invested into your child, their journey, and the school itself, your child has a much more rewarding experience at school. And that's definitely proved to be the case both for myself, my brother, and now my daughter in particular. My daughter is heavily into netball. She'd like to be a professional netballer one day, so I am very encouraging with her. We're often outside playing netball together in the garden. I get involved with her netball clubs where I can, help raise money, do any volunteering work for them. I also have a passion for netball that I ignited a couple of years ago. So I will also, so she sees that, actually this is something we can do together. So I always just try to do those things. Her school recently, off of recent global events in 2020 around George Floyd, her school has started a diversity and equalities commission, so I have joined that so I can really understand the dynamic and the world and what her school is going to do to address and have better awareness amongst their teaching staff and their pupils, because I think it really does start from a young age, and the experiences you have from a young age. So yeah, I just really just try to get involved as much as possible so I can understand what things are going to impact her day to day, and then I then know how I can then communicate and talk to her about those things if I have a little bit of insight myself.
That's amazing. It sounds like, yeah, you're very busy, but it's so interesting, I think. And so, why was it important for you to talk about 2020 with your kids? Because you mentioned, obviously, the school is also trying to put some work in, like educating the kids, but why are you also doing it on the side?
Yeah, well, I think 2020, and for anybody who has been on any form of COVID webinars or I think the term is unprecedented times. This 2020 has been a year unlike no other for so many reasons, actually. So I think for me, it's been really important, even more so, to stay very closely tuned to the children and what they're going through, because they're going through things that we have never experienced and all of us are, actually. So I think it's important for me, mental health and mental well-being is key. So actually it's been my level of involvement or understanding or just pausing, taking that time to stop and think, which is what I think 2020 has given us all, has been even more crucial, because 2020 has just been a strange year, and a lot has happened, a lot of changes in the world, and I would always say they're not all negative. There's been lots of positive things. I think there's lots of families reconnecting, actually children being at home with their parents. I remember reading something at the beginning of the pandemic around children are eating less takeaways, they're with their families more, parents are actually parenting their children. And as I read it, I was like, you're assuming we didn't do it before. We did, but I think there are lots of positive. And one of the things that I think about 2020 that I've noticed is we've all become a little bit more humane. We've slowed down. So when you ask somebody, how are you? You actually genuinely are asking them, how are you? And waiting for a response. Whereas before, you'd say, how are you? Yes, well, anyway, I need to get to this report or get to this document. So I feel like we've all remembered we're humans and not machines.
Yeah, definitely a positive thing. But obviously, did you feel your kids were feeling stressed out, or like feeling their parents' stress? Did they feel the need to talk about COVID and the virus?
Yeah, so in our house in particular, actually, it was a slightly different dynamic. And for me, just in our house particular, and everything I mentioned, I'm relating just to our home, because every home is different and
Yes.
every child is different. In our home, it showed in two different ways between the boys and the girls in our home, actually. And for me, Amber joined her school in September, sorry. In February, unfortunately, one of her school friends died unexpectedly. So we had that dynamic of 2020 to understand, speaking to 11-year-old around mortality of losing someone your own age at that age was, really trying to get her to understand that and work her through that. And then soon after that, we then had COVID. So for my daughter in particular, it was very much, she was very much aware of COVID, but it brought her a little bit of anxiety because her thinking of mortality had been heightened because she just lost a friend as well.
I can
So had to handle it very differently with her, but she's very mature, very logical, very methodical in her thinking. I have always had I've always spoken to her, not like she's an adult, but I didn't do baby talk. I've always encouraged her to ask why, if she's not sure on something, had that very open relationship that we could sort of talk about anything and everything. And we talk a lot about our feelings, which I think is really important. So for her, we definitely had to be sort of very understanding and go into a lot of detail around COVID, what it meant, what changes in the world. Her school was great though, because they came up with lots of mini projects, and they always had like a when they set their homeschooling, they had their well-being page as well, and they had well-being tasks that they had to do, and they did a well-being week and a day where the children literally sat on Zoom calls just talking or colouring together, or so getting that balance was really right. For the boys, it didn't appear to be as apparent, but how it showed in the boys, for example, was in homeschooling. So I think about my 8-year-old stepson in particular. He'd wake up and he'd be completely bright and happy in his day, and then the second you'd mention, okay, now we have to do schoolwork, he'd be like, oh
Oh,
no, like it just
it's
become
the
like the
hardest.
worst day. Yeah, and then just his whole demeanor, his whole response, and he struggled a little bit more with homeschooling, because he also felt like he was doing more at home than at school. My daughter had a similar experience, but she sort of adapted more. But I don't know if that's an age thing, I don't know if it's a girl boy thing, it's just something that we noticed in our home specifically.
Mm-hmm.
So it was we had to take very different approaches with the my 19-year-old stepson. We had to sort of handle the whole COVID pandemic from an understanding of, you now cannot be as free, like you have had freedom, you understand what it is to be able to go there and be out and about and do your own thing, and go meet your friends, and now that world is going to change, because now you have to be at home and dealing with the challenges around having a 19-year-old that has their freedom taken away, but not quite being a full adult to be very understanding to it.
Yes, another challenge for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and there were lots of positives. I speak to the challenges around COVID, but then as a family, we spent a lot of time, like we implemented things like weekly family meetings, just to sort of, because we were all in the same house at the same time. It was, what went well last week, what things do we want to achieve in the coming week.
Hmm.
Different ones of us hosted the meeting, different ones, different members of the family made snacks for the meeting,
I
and it
really
was a
like that.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually the children really liked it. It was, surprisingly enough, I overheard my daughter in one of her Zoom form calls when her teacher said, no, what's been the best bit of your week this week? And she's like, oh, my mum's introduced family meetings. And then what we did was, because we were very aware and conscious that all of a sudden we're in the same house together, locked in for that same amount of time with lots of feelings and emotions. We also did part of that family meeting. It sounds a little bit silly, but actually it worked. We did a recognition. What did you really appreciate? And everybody in the family had to recognize somebody else in the family for something that they had done, for either the family or the individual, that the person really appreciated, and to call that out, because we sort of felt like everything that the children or we were seeing was, the rise in the numbers and, freedoms being taken away. It was all a lot of negative messaging coming in, and obviously any negative feelings you would have inside, how do you then flip that and start thinking about actually what positives have come out of it? And we used our family meetings to really enhance that and have conversations about that, and show the people in the house that yes, we may get irritated and we might find it frustrating, because now, work, school, fun, eat, everything is within the four walls of your home. Actually, there is a lot of appreciation that can come out of that too.
Yes, and so you also like took that time to get closer to the family and just also probably remind them that they can come to you whenever they have any doubt or questions, or the communication is open.
Yeah, definitely 100%. And it's one of the things I would always say, 2020 has definitely made that even more of a focus, is that open communication. And at times I would sit down and communicate to the children, and especially my daughter, because she and I will have lots of of one-to-one questions, and time, to say to her that sometimes mummy's not okay, mummy's struggling too. Because one of the things that I've always found it really important, is to not teach the children that they need to be happy all the time. As humans, we have a whole source of emotions, and we need to learn to embrace them all. We will get angry, we will be sad, we will get frustrated. We are not always happy. And I've always encouraged the children, and especially my daughter, to embrace the fact that you are not always going to be happy, to be able to own it, communicate it, and work out what you want to do about it. So, sometimes I would because it teaches them that they're only human. I don't want her to think I always have to be happy. And if I show her that mummy is always happy, she's going to think I always need to be happy. So I'm very much sometimes we'd have a conversation. I'd be like, oh, mummy's having a tough day today. mummy has worked non-stop, and homeschooling wasn't easy for me either, just so that she can understand that we as adults have challenges too, and that the world isn't all rosy and wonderful. And you do have to, it's a very fine line between not traumatizing them but making them have their eyes very wide open. I'm always want the children to grow up with the fact that we don't live in a perfect world. There are lots of great things about it, but it's not perfect. So then when they come into those situations where they face something that isn't perfect, they have a coping mechanism. They know what they know. It doesn't hit them out of nowhere like, oh my gosh, but I thought everything was wonderful.
Exactly. And also remind them that they're not the only ones feeling that way, that they're not bad people for feeling frustrated or anything, that it's normal and will do.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things that I did always encourage the children, so my daughter being a little bit older than my youngest stepson, she had a mobile phone. I'd always say to her, check in on your friends, have a video call, have that downtime, do a joint video call, remember to make sure everybody's doing okay. Or I mean, they were obviously dealing with the loss of a friend as well as COVID and the change of dynamics too, so just do that check-in time. And then with my youngest stepson, he'd always be on his Nintendo Switch, and like when you're playing, go reach out, play your games with your friends and have that interaction. And so for me it's that communication, that reaching out. And also for me it was just reminding them that yes, we are all stuck within these four walls, but we do have a support network, friends, family, teachers, coaches, everything outside of that, us that are going through what we're going through too. We're not, this isn't just us.
Yeah, very interesting. And do you have some kind of preparation before you go and tell them about a subject where, like, if it's COVID or Black Lives Matter, do you kind of prep before you talk about it, or is it them who come to you and ask questions and you just have a conversation?
It can be either or. In our house, it's a real mix. There's some things that I really want to drive in our home. So there's some things that I want to make sure and bring to the forefront around Black Lives Matter. I want to make sure that the children have an awareness of how they may be seen in the world, but what they can do about that, and how they can actually use it to empower themselves and find a solution, make them aware of the problem. But what do you do as a solution rather than staying in that moment of the problem? I'm very much on the recognize the problem exists, but then drive for a solution. And it doesn't have to be a you only solution. It can be like with your friends or a group, or just kind of turn your outlook. And my daughter said to me the other day, Mummy, they do always say every cloud have a silver lining, even a thunder cloud has a silver lining. And I sort of sat back and I kind of grinned. And she's like, why are you smiling? I said, because I'm really glad that you understand that there is that thundercloud, but then how do you kind of have that flip it thinking to look for that silver lining, that positive outcome? So that was great. So there is some prep time depending on what it is. So it might be, I sit and talk to my partner and we have conversations and decide, okay, well, this is really sensitive, or something happened today, and do we want to talk to the children about it? How do we want to talk about it? Is there a podcast? Is there some form of Instagram live? Is there some form of external thing that we want to bring up the topic? Has it come from the books the children read? And I remember my daughter was reading a book and she came to me and she's like, Mummy, is the use of the word Negro negative? And having that conversation. So it can come from both directions, and it can take prep. And sometimes when they do ask a question when they bring it, I don't always address it there and then as well. Sometimes I do, and sometimes I say, okay, we will come back to that one and remind Mummy to come back to it, because if it's something that I feel requires prep and it's they've asked, but I think I need to do a little bit of prep or think of how I'm going to message it, I will say, actually, that's quite complicated, or Mummy needs to think about how we have this conversation. But then one of the things I do is I always make sure I go back and have that conversation.
Okay.
The children in our house make sure we do too. So if my daughter asks something, being of her age group, they started to discuss in science and sex and how you make babies, and she asked some questions and I was a little bit like, not sure I want to handle that. We will have this conversation, but not give Mummy a minute. And if the next day Mummy, remember I asked you a question, the following day, remember I asked you a question, it's like, okay, yep, I get it.
Yeah, so you always try, so if you're not sure, you try to educate yourself first and think of the best words to use, because I think there's always a thin line between educating and traumatizing when it's about sensitive subjects. Don't be afraid to say I don't know, I think.
100%. I sometimes, and it happened in the world of homeschooling. I'm sure lots of parents who are homeschooling like me would feel exactly the same way. Sometimes you looked at some of the homework and the questions, and I would be like, I actually don't know the answer to this one. Let's call your uncle who is a real mathematician, or let's speak to your, my partner, her stepdad. He's really great at maths. I'm stronger in English. I just, there'll be, I'm very comfortable actually both in work and at home to say, I don't know, but I'll go and find out, or let's go and find out together. So some of the things I'd say, okay, well, let's do some internet search, couldn't go to the library, let's have a look and let's work together on some of it, which has been great. So yeah, I always say to her, I don't know everything, but I do say to her, I see everything.
Yeah, and also you don't know, but what do you do about it? You
Yeah.
go and get the info. You don't just say, oh, I don't know. It's a good example, I think, also you can set for them.
Yes, yeah, yeah. And for me that comes back to that, when the children go through that why stage, not stopping them, encouraging them to ask why. And I am very sure that as they grow to be teenagers, especially my daughter, I can see it already, that it's going to be challenging when she is a teenager. The why, I might ask her to do something, it'll be, why does it need to be done like that? Or she'll give me her opinion, but I encourage her to have that opinion. And for all the children in our house, I encourage them to have an opinion. I don't come from the school of thought that children should be seen and not heard. They are humans, they have feelings. I have introduced a concept of, and I had to do this for my daughter because she pushed back quite a bit. A very strong, determined young lady, so she pushed back quite a bit on. But I think it should be done like this, and this is my opinion. And I've had to say to her, sometimes there are times when you just have to do what I say, and we'll give it a name so that you know that there is no back and forth at that time. By and large, mummy will allow you to have that back and forth, but there will be occasions where we'll say whatever this you know, special word is, that you just have to do it. And it might be just because mummy doesn't have time. It might just be because it's a safety thing, that you just need to do as I say rather than question me. And then where you can, I will allow us to have that conversation, because more importantly, I want her to grow. And I focus a lot on my daughter. Obviously, I've spent more time with her, but then it's actually extends out into the stepchildren. My stepchildren, I want them to grow where they're inquisitive and they always ask why, and they feel like their opinion matters. I always introduce the concept of not just being a voice in the room, but being a heard voice in the room. So,
Mhm.
Listening to hear, not always to speak. So make sure you're observing the room, listening to people in the room, and then when you do speak, you speak clearly, you speak well, you thought out what you're going to do, what you're going to say, so people in the room want to listen to what you're saying. So be heard, not just someone in the room that just talks for the sake of it. And I want them to be able to challenge in a healthy way when someone says they can't do something. Like, they can't be told, my daughter may be told, you can't do that because girls don't do that. Well, why don't they? It's something I want to do. Why can't I do it? I want them to continue to have that. And I recognize that through the teenage years, it's going to be a struggle because they're going to push back. But then as adults, they will learn to fine tune it and know when and where to use it.
When to speak up.
Yeah, 100%.
That's very interesting. I really like that. And so, do you have any advice that you would like to share?
Yeah, I would always say, and this is going to sound really, I don't want it to be cliche, but it really depends on your child, and everybody knows their child and they know what works best for their child. Some children you can be sort of much more direct, but I always have a thing is I go with my gut. It's one of the things that, not just with the children in general, I feel like my gut very rarely steers me wrong. And I think just know there are times you're going to get it wrong. You're not always going to get it right. I think we strive to, as parents, think, we are always going to get, and I know as a parent, I can be quite hard on myself. There are going to be times that you get it wrong. And in those instances where I do get it wrong or I've made an error, I am actually that parent that will apologize to my child and say, I'm really sorry I got that wrong. because actually it teaches them that humility of, you're not always going to get things right, you're not going to be perfect, you are going to get things wrong, but again, it's what you do about when you've done something wrong. What do you do about it? How do you make the other person feel? So, you know, if I've homeschooling with my daughter, there was an instance where she was doing a piece of work and I asked her to change it, and she said, "Mummy, is what I've done not good enough?" And I realized that, as much as I know I can be a perfectionist, I realized that actually what I thought I was doing was encouraging her to just add a little bit extra, but actually for her, the message she was getting was, what I've done is not good enough. And I sort of had to look at it from 11-year-old, and I realized, actually, do you know what? That's not the feeling I wanted her to have. I apologized. My daughter loved flowers. I actually went and bought her a bunch of flowers just to say, I'm really sorry, I got it wrong. And to another parent, that may seem really extreme, but what I'm trying to teach my daughter is that you're not always going to get it right, but when you do get it wrong, it's what you do about it.
Exactly. I really like that, because it's not about, oh, I'm the parent, you do what I say. It's also like, you're allowed to make mistakes, but what do you do about it? You
Yeah.
apologize, try to make it better.
Yeah, totally. And for me, that's one of the the advice I would say is, go with your gut, and recognize, as a parent, we will get it wrong, but what you are teaching your child in that is that actually they're not always going to get things right. And I think for them, then, as they grow, they become a bit more comfortable with themselves, being able to go and make choices. I always refer to choices rather than decisions, because decisions sound so final. That they will make choices, and those choices may not always be the right one, but actually there isn't, I always also teach children about, you either win or you learn. So actually, what can you learn from that, and what can you do differently?
And they will know also how to rectify and identify when probably it's a mistake, and they know how to actually react.
Yeah. And that concept of trying to make it better, and recognizing, and for me, it's being mindful of other people, and mindful how your actions can impact somebody else. And then, if you have upset somebody, to address it as well, have a conversation with the person. I encourage the children all the time, and I even encourage them to have it. I say to the children all the time, if I've upset you, tell me I've upset you, let's have that conversation. And it might be that I've upset you because I've told you have to do your homework, and it is what it is, because you have to do your homework and I can't change that. But if I've upset you, you can tell me. Don't shout at me though. Don't be rude, but communicate to me that you are upset. And if I've upset you, communicate to me why I've upset you, and then we can have a conversation about it. So I would just say, go with your gut, go with the child, go with how you're feeling, and just always try to talk. And know when not to talk, though, because sometimes it is time just to say, let's just pause on this and come back to it with a clearer head, or with more information.
Yes, I really like that one. That's great. Well, thank you so much, Heidi. It was very interesting. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you again for joining.
No, thank you for asking me. I hope it will be useful.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. Feel free to share if you think it might be helpful to someone you know. If you enjoyed this episode, then please make sure to give it a rating and subscribe if you haven't already. That's it from me. See you soon with the next episode, and in the meantime, have a lovely day.